now that we have heard about Richard Trumka, I think leads really well to my next question for you, which was, who is a figure from the labor movement, either, somebody who is active now or somebody from the past that you wish more people knew about? Oh, and by the way, I gave Paul a sort of unfair stipulation, which is that right. I said that Paul couldn't say Tony Mazzocchi, but who else, Paul?
And also, I put this restriction on myself to not say A. Philip Randolph, so I forced myself to get out of that. But the person I'm going to name today is Maida Springer, and I recently wrote an article for Jacobin about her. Really tremendous figure. She should be a lot more well-known than she is, but she was a leader not just in the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, but also, speaking of the afl-cio, she became the afl-cio's main representative across Africa. And her life, to me, is a really great example of the social democratic civil rights and labor alliance that emerged during the New Deal and anchored Black politics for decades. She grew up in Harlem at a time where it was almost impossible not to be affected by political developments. Her mother was an active member of Marcus Garvey's organization, the United Negro Improvement Association, but she was also ecumenical. She hosted all kinds of political meetings at the house that exposed Maida Springer to different political currents. Through her mother, and of course her own personal experiences, she was developing a passion to fight racial injustice, but she was also exposed to how it was intimately tied to class. In Harlem in the 1920s and 30s, you had the Don't Buy Where You Can't Work campaigns, where Black communities would picket stores that refused to hire Black workers. Often these were extremely diverse coalitions, including Black nationalists, Black communists, and Black trade unionists. It was through this that she met the person that influenced her the most, A. Philip Randolph. When Maida was still a teenager, she would go to her neighbor's house and help lick envelopes for her parents. She didn't know at the time that her friend's dad was a Pullman porter, and these envelopes were for leaflets for the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, which Randolph organized and was the president of. Springer said that Randolph made her realize the importance of interracial working class struggle and how if the economic situation did not change, no progress could be made for most Black people. So she took up work in the garment industry, and her timing was fortunate. A huge garment industry general strike took place in 1934, and this was transformative for Maida. She joined the Garment Workers Union and immediately got swept up in union work. There was a flood of new members joining, and the union was always looking for people to step up and take leadership roles, and that's exactly what Maida did. Here, she learned basic trade union and political skills like parliamentary procedure, handling grievances, understanding a contract. The Garment Workers Union was also unique in that it had an extremely vibrant cultural life. So, for an example, by 1938, the union had over 600 educational groups that were attended by over 22,000 students across the country. The union offered film screenings, dances, parties, concerts, hikes, museum trips, and more. And in 1940, Springer became chair of the Education Committee and continued to build up one of the best education departments of any union in the country. And it was through the union that Springer found her calling in life. And this is an important point to make about how important the trade union movement was and still is. Think about what other institutions in the 1930s, besides maybe the church, could offer working class Black women like Maida Springer these kinds of opportunities for fulfillment, for dignity, and for exercising leadership. And you see similar accounts from Black women in other unions at the time, like the United Packing House Workers or Tobacco Workers Union in the South. So during this time, Springer also campaigned for the New Deal and was one of Randolph's trusted field generals. She organized multiple rallies in the 1940s for a permanent Fair Employment Practices Commission, which addressed workplace discrimination. And then after World War II, she turned her focus to international affairs. She was selected by the Union to travel to Britain in 1945 to observe wartime conditions. And since this is one of the only videos I could find of her, let's look at her talking about that trip.
As a member of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, I'm one of the 4 women representing American labor going to Britain to learn from the women of England how they've overcome all of the difficulties entailed in managing a home, a job, taking children to nursery schools, and just how they feel about post-war, what their job will be, their relationship to government, since they have a much more widely controlled setup than do we over here.
But what made this trip especially important is she made contact with people that would eventually become leaders in the anti-colonial movement across Africa and the Caribbean. She met Jomo Kenyatta from Kenya, George Padmore and Eric Williams from Trinidad, and more. She realized that decolonization was going to be one of the most important political developments in the post-war world, and she wanted to be a part of it. She was put on an international committee of the afl-cio and was put to the task of helping develop the labor movement in various African countries. Just like in the US, she considered herself a democratic socialist. She rejected both capitalism and the Communist Party. She wanted to find a similar route in Africa. She wanted to help lay the groundwork for strong democratic trade unions that could help create strong, independent African countries. She summed up her goals like this. My view was that you were attempting to structure opportunities for African trade unionists to improve their skills so that at some point down the line, as independence became a reality, they could contribute something positive to that society. Springer played a role in many trade union programs that were developed throughout the continent. These programs usually were intended to improve workforce skills and basic trade union consciousness. Some examples are a motor driver school in Nigeria, a scholarship program to bring African trade unions to the United States to learn from our labor movement, a union-sponsored cooperative housing program in Kenya, and a school for tailors also in Kenya. And there were many more other things I could cite. So throughout Africa, Maida was known as a trusted and reliable source of help to the labor movement. However, it did become harder to maintain this reputation as the afl-cio's international policy became more contradictory. As we now know, the afl-cio was part of the effort to undermine communist unions throughout the world, including in Africa. Springer herself got caught in between her desires for a democratic socialist path for Africa and the realities of imperialist efforts throughout the continent. When Springer came back to the United States, she was appointed as the Midwest director of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, which is created to serve as a bridge between the labor movement and civil rights movement. And she had noticed that many Black communities were not aware of the opportunities that existed within organized labor. And she was disturbed by what she thought was an unfair reputation of labor for being part of the establishment and opposed to the civil rights movement. So she worked on educational programming to address this. She continued her activism both domestically and abroad until her death in 2005. But it is because of stories like hers that I really bristle when I hear people on the left make really oversimplified blanket statements about the labor movement always being racist and sexist. Her experience directly contradicts that. She wasn't naive. She experienced plenty of discrimination in the labor movement, both for her race and her gender. But she also saw the opportunities that labor movement gave her to fight that very same discrimination. And I'll end this segment with a beautiful quote of hers from an interview that she did at the end of her life. She said, "I have an unending love affair with the American labor movement. I make no apologies for whatever has found to be wrong with the American labor movement, but so much has been right that I will always be an advocate. To the degree that a government can be challenged and workers can have the right to help to determine their hours of work, conditions of employment, redress of their grievances, it's the labor movement that made this contribution on behalf of the working class. I remain a member of that class without apology." So that is my person for today. Again, incredible person, should be more well known. And you know, it's kind of interesting. This might sound a little cynical, but when I wrote this article, you know, part of what I was thinking, I was like, you know, this is again, incredible Black woman ignored by history. And I really wonder if at some point the hyper wokes are gonna like try to reclaim her legacy. When if you look at so many of her quotes, again, like we always talk about, she would be called
a class reductionist.
She really would. I mean, and you know, I included some of the quotes that are actually a little less controversial, but you know, it's just kind of interesting to think about, because I think with some of these figures, like they try to reclaim them. And I've kind of mentioned this about C.L.R. James before, where I feel like, you know, his legacy is being reclaimed, I think, kind of in the wrong way. So I've been curious if this is going to happen with Maida Springer soon. That's part of why I wanted to get out in front of it and, you know, present, you know, what I thought was a real depiction of her life.
Yeah, well, so two things. One is that this is exactly why I asked you this question. I knew that you would have something like this. And in fact, you did. By the way, I love that story about Maida going over to A. Philip Randolph's house when she was young and like licking the envelopes.
Right.
That's amazing.
Right.
Is that how you found out about her? Because you were researching like because you know everything about A. Philip Randolph?
It actually came through, I was reading about Bayard Rustin. And, she was also involved in plenty just like general civil rights activity.
Sorry, who's Bayard Rustin? No, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see your face.
Right.
Well,
that's the next time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I came across her there, and they mentioned she was a labor activist. I had never heard of her, so I just started digging. There's a great oral history, interviews of her.
Yeah.
Where there's a lot of just gem quotes that you can find.
Class reductionist quotes. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay. So the final point I want to make, just going back to what we were both saying earlier about the unions being really the rank and file is, it's great, obviously, to hear about these kind of like overlooked or forgotten figures like Maida, but like she would not have been able to do anything that she did without her fellow union members, So right. I think I just want to throw that out there that like for every, like unknown person that you uncover, there's going to be like countless others whose names never get mentioned at all.
Right. And, I think her story actually is a great example of the point we were talking about unions' role in civil society. Because again, I'm always amazed reading accounts from the 30s and 40s. It's like, where else in society during Jim Crow, both in the South and the North, besides maybe some particular examples, are Black people exercising this kind of political activity, leadership ability? Labor was really central for that. And that is why, in the South, during the 30s and 40s, the CIO, which was the Labor Federation, it was literally synonymous with, anti-Jim Crow.
Right.
Like, the racist politicians in the South, they knew the CIO. They regarded it as the same thing as like the civil rights movement, because in many ways it was. But especially in this particular union, the garment workers, they had just a great it was almost like an alternative society in a way for workers that they had built up, and that's just so important.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe. You can also watch the full episode and catch our future live streams by clicking the join button below and becoming a Jacobin YouTube member. Thanks.